And hello and welcome to AleksConnects Creative Sandbox. My name is Alex and it's dark today because I forgot to turn off the light. Turn on the light, so yep, now we turn on the light and it's fine. So yeah, hello and welcome to AleksConnects Sandbox, Creative Sandbox. So today we finally kind of starting the portraits, but I wish it was much easier. With me, there's no things as there's no such thing as easy. I always kind of overcomplicate stuff personally for myself, and because of this, even with dealing with the simple portraits, I'm still going to make them complicated. Because again, one of the reasons why I'm doing this, I'm going to talk about throughout the session, but mainly one of the reasons why I'm overcomplicating stuff, it's just to basically complicate stuff first in order for then to simplify them. As I said before, I truly believe that as an artist we should basically learn art in its complexity, and then basically learn how to simplify it till the end of our days. And in order to work with this kind of I don't know, look at my journey, I decided to basically work even with simple stuff, add an element of complexity to it, because it will help us to learn much more efficiently. So throughout today's session, unfortunately, we're not going to paint anything or draw anything because I don't believe that we're going to have time. Again, we have about 2 hours to cover the topics that I want to cover, and in most cases the things that I want to cover are pretty important. So before starting to work with portraits, we need to kind of ask ourselves some proper questions. I basically in previous stream I covered all art fundamentals theory, so fundamentals of art theory, and I touched upon the topic that you need to think about your fundamental theory in application to your personal or current purposes. And since my personal purposes are the portraits, although I try to cover right here everything that you need to know as even to create a complex illustration, but in most cases this is something that you need to just basically create a pretty picture. If you want to create a deep complex illustrations with storytelling, with complex composition, for that you need to study composition, design and storytelling separately. These 3 big topics that are pretty connected together, and they're also connected with these basic 3 parts of the knowledge, which is perspective, form and color. So I will try to make this stream structured. Again, I still don't know how to make streams structured, because usually I'm pretty hectic at the beginning when I'm starting to figure out things, and then I'm pretty chaotic, but then I'm starting to put pieces together throughout outside of this chaos. So basically my brain works this way, I'm going through some type of a brainstorming, and it might seem crazy and weird and unclear, but then the more I will talk about this chaos, the more this chaos starts to make sense, and at some point I will put it into the structure. So this is the same kind of that I tried to do with this scheme that we talked about in a previous stream, which is again all our fundamentals that you need to know in terms of a creative, perfect, pretty pictures, but it's not enough, of course, if you want to create a complex illustration. But again, for our purposes of dealing with portraits, it's going to be more than enough. We're still going to talk about how to add story into portraits, and this is the first topic that we're going to cover today. And then we will basically gradually touch upon the pipeline, how I'm going to deal with portraits personally, what questions I need to answer in order to find the right answers, so ask in order to find the right answers, and etc. So basically this is it. This is going to be kind of a weird stream, I don't know. Hopefully tomorrow I will be able to finally start actually draw and create portraits. But again, right now I'm still need to a couple of problems. I still have a couple of problems to solve before heading into the portraits, and let's just cover that. Because again, usually I'm going to approach things not in a direct way. So before starting to draw portraits, before starting to draw complex illustration, I want to provide you with the background, where I'm coming from, why I decide to basically like create portraits, what are my reasons behind that, because it might help you to understand your personal reasons, why you're doing something, and extract more from your personal experiences. Because I truly believe in the fact that as an artist, we just like, I know that there's a notion like, if you want to learn to draw, just draw. If you want to learn how to paint, just paint. But again, this just element, not necessarily enough personally for me as a theoretical person. I can't just like aimlessly sit and draw something, or aimlessly sit and paint something without necessarily understanding what I'm doing. For me, the main thing is to understand what I'm doing, and this is one of the ways that we're going to approach our future streams. So I will talk about theory a lot. I will talk about theory throughout the process, and for now, since I don't have that much of experience in practice, I'm going to focus on theory more than on practice. But right now, I believe we are actually not on a theoretical part, but more on the practical part, because when we talked about perspective, form, color, when we worked with brushes before, when we like talked a little bit about color harmony, about color, and this was kind of a theoretical thing, but what we're going to discuss today, it's much more practical thing, which will help us to actually take an action towards basically starting like working with portraits. So again, let's just start with that. Again, I covered this theory in the previous stream. It was like 7 hours of putting things together. Then I basically translated it in Russian for a Russian audience, for them, in order to basically have some type of comparison. And I created separate Russian stream where I talked about this separately. So again, today we're going to focus on portraits, and the first thing that I want to talk about the portraits is basically how to control portraits. So as I said before, in order to create pretty pictures, we need all these art fundamentals. We need to understand perspective, form, color. In most cases, most of these things, I believe I'm covered. I mean, I understand dimensions, I understand primitives, I kind of understand anatomy, which I said before, like, you don't have to perfectly learn anatomy in order to progress into the next stage. You could just basically, the anatomy part is something that you will learn throughout your creative journey. It's not going to be learned right away. There are basics, but still, there's so many complex subjects in space that you need to basically spend the whole life in order to learn how to draw all of them. So because of this, I mean this element of the anatomy, which I mean not only applicable to the human anatomy, but to every anatomy of the car, of any type of technical like object or whatever, everything has its own anatomy. So because of this, I believe, since in most cases I covered the dimensions and primitives, light and perspective, kinda, color basics and material textures, and the third parts are something that we're going to focus on during the actual experience, during the practice. We still don't have the elements to control the story in portraits, because this is the problem with portraits, and this is one of the reasons why I chose them. I chose them because for me it's a simple way to gradually come from simple thing and transition into the much more complex thing. So this is one of the basic reasons why. Just put this one here. Wait a sec. Yep, this is one of the main reasons why I decided to do that. Let's just check the sound and continue. One of the main reasons why I decided to do that. Works. So yeah, again, I tried to spend a little bit more time to structure the stream, but again, it's going to be kind of chaotic, so sorry about that again. But again, in most cases, this is the progress that I need to go through in order to start working on something, because I truly believe that, yes, there are people that are true practitioners, and in order to start working on something, they just need to start work on something. For me, I need a little bit more preparation, and it doesn't mean that I'm going to prepare like forever. So I know that there are people who like look at this a little bit different way. Like, I mean, they are not ready to create something, and they go into the preparation and they are finding themselves in the loop of preparation and never going to start working. I learned from the experience how to get rid of this kind of continuous preparation element and finally start working on something. So I actually need to cover a couple of topics, and we're going to talk about these topics throughout the session. So I need to cover, in most cases, 4 basic topics. So the first topic is basically a portrait control. So how to control portraits in order to actually portray the story. Since we already established that in order to draw portraits we don't need to learn like crazy composition, crazy storytelling, and crazy design, but still we will try to understand what elements of the composition, storytelling, and design we could actually use to tell the story in the portrait. Because again, usually portraits are not they are super simple. You just basically draw any character that you're chosen and again our character is going to be first character that we're going to draw is and paint going to be Amélie from 2001 Amélie the movie, the French movie I believe. So it's awesome movie, it's awesome character, and it's definitely going to be an interesting experience to paint her and draw her and basically study her. So, but before going into that, again, I need to cover 4 basic topics. Again, portrait control in order to understand how to implement the elements of the story. The portrait pipeline, which will kind of, portrait control. The second one is the personal reasons, like what I want to extract from creating those portraits. I don't want to just like basically paint portraits for no freaking reason. I want to actually understand the deep reasons behind that, what I'm going to learn from that, what type of elements of studying I could implement inside of portrait creation in order to extract more efficient way of, I don't know, getting experience. So basically it's all about efficiency. So personal reasons. The third one is portrait pipeline. Develop the actual portrait pipeline that is going to be developed based on those reasons. Then we're going to cover the illustration stages, which are the basic illustration stages that you need to go through. They are they are almost the same and similar for every type of illustration. For simple illustration such as portrait, for complex illustration, they are similar for every type of illustration, I believe. So we will cover illustration stages, basic ones, and we will cover illustration passes, which is a personal reflection of our process. Again, I already talked about stages and passes previously in previous streams. At the beginning of the previous stream I talked about it pretty extensively. It's already uploaded on YouTube, so go check that out. Again, if you have questions, ask. I will try to answer them, but in most cases, to save time, we will proceed. So let's just start. So the first thing that we need to cover in order to create a portrait, so let's just use our personal brushes that we created throughout the couple of weeks, which is pretty cool. We're going to use a regular line brush for that. Again, this is just going to be kind of a note thing, so hopefully it's not going to be super big. So again, we need to cover 5 topics today. So the first, it's let's just create a heading for it. Let's just call it, okay. Let's just call it kidding. Efficient portrait creation? I don't know. Portrait creation. Again, I'm all about efficiency in this particular instance, and what I mean by efficient portrait creation is basically we need to understand why are we creating these portraits, and what we're going to get from that. Because again, I know that most of the artists are starting with portraits to kind of establish themselves as an artist at the beginning. Again, we could use this kind of reason too, but we're actually going to talk about the personal reasons, not necessarily to promote ourselves and like work on a fun art and basically establish ourselves as an artist. This is kind of a less important kind of a thing. The most important thing is how to create portraits, not just for the sake of creating them, but to learn as much efficient as possible. So I will try to implement these elements of efficiency. So the first is basically we're going to cover portrait control. This information is already there, so there's, I mean, we're not going to spend that much on that. The more time I'm going to probably spend on explaining personal reasons and then going into the portrait pipeline. So again, so the first thing is going to be, I wish I didn't need it to do this, like, right? It's actually, I don't like writing in a computer. Like, it's not necessarily a super convenient way to do that, but still, we're still going to do that. So, so the first thing is basically a portrait control. So the portrait control is basically will allow you to control wait a sec. Allow you to control the storytelling inside of the portrait, because again, most of the portraits, most of the people are using portraits just for the study. We all saw a lot of portrait studies done by other artists. They didn't necessarily adding that many of like elements of storytelling. They didn't necessarily understanding why maybe they are studying portraits. So the portrait control is basically for us is a way to add a story into the portraits, or basically personalized. Yeah, the way to personalize the study. So instead of just studying portraits, we actually go into create our own version of the portrait. So, and for that we need to kind of understand the portrait control. So way to personalize the story by adding some to study by adding a story. Not necessarily a story, but by adding an idea. Yeah, let's just call it idea, because for portraits, I don't believe that we will be able to implement like crazy stories into the portrait. Remember, this is just a simple portrait. Usually they don't have that many, like that big of an ideas, because again, the only thing that like simple portrait is going to have, efficient portrait. I don't know if we should establish a simple portrait or not, because complex portraits are going to be a little bit different. So yeah, let's just establish that it's going to be a simple portrait. So for now, we're working with a simple portrait, so the efficient simple portrait creation, because complex portrait is going to have a little bit different elements. I mean, the same is going to be applied, but there's going to be a couple of additional ones, and once we will get to the complex portraits, we're going to talk about that. So again, efficient portrait creation is basically first thing that we need to establish is portrait control. So portrait control basically separates on a couple of topics. So the first, and so for us, we need to do this. Again, this is the way to personalize the study by adding an idea, and the only way to portray the idea for the simple portrait is through subtle body language. So this is basically the only thing that we will be able to control in here. So the subtle body language. I forgot how to. Seriously? Subtle. Hopefully it's right. Yep. Body language. Again, remember that we are working only with the head, with the neck, and partially shoulders. There's not that many elements to control. It could be a good idea, like, to explain what simple portrait means. I guess it could be a good idea. Yep. So basically, simple portrait is basically we have head, we have neck, and we have shoulders. That's it. So the simple portrait is not other than just head, neck, and shoulders, which is basically a bust. Again, we have in the head, we have the head, we have the neck, and we have the shoulders. So that's it. So this is going to be our simple portrait. So as you see, there's not that many elements of control. Let's just get rid of this weird thing. So, and the only way to control a simple portrait is through subtle body language. This is the only thing that I could add from design and from storytelling in here, without necessarily focusing on complex composition, because again, this is kind of close to the composition, but in most cases it's more applicable to the storytelling, not to the composition necessarily. So what are we doing right now by establishing subtle body language is more applicable to the storytelling part of the theory. So what is storytelling? So yeah, through the subtle body language. So language, yes. So, and in order to do that, we have only 4 points of control. So let's just try to establish those. I don't know how to do that though. From here maybe? Maybe do something like this. So what we can control by having only head, neck, and shoulders? I guess it's clear. If we have only these 3 elements, we can control only things within those 3 elements. So first is the position of the head. So we're definitely able to control position of the head, which is a direction. Rotation to the viewer. It's not necessarily the same, because direction it's where it's basically going when it's directed, but we also need to think about it like rotation to the viewer. No, you gotta be kidding me. Rotation to the viewer, and the last one is a tilt. We will cover all those things once we will start to work on portraits themselves. So again, yeah, we will establish like what's the difference with the direction, with the rotation to the viewer, and with the tilt. Because again, right now it's kind of, I don't believe that it's going to be clear if we will start to like. But again, I hope it's clear. Again, head could have some type of direction. It could have a rotation to the viewer, which is going to be our picture plane, and how this head is going to be rotated, like from this viewer's standpoint. And of course the tilt, how it's going to be tilted. So it's not going to be just like strict head. It could have some type of a tilt. So again, this is the way to control the head for the portrait. So the second thing is position of shoulders. which is basically, by the way, position of the head and position of the shoulders ideally give us the control of the neck. So we're not covering the neck controls specifically because it's not separated from head and shoulders. This is something that basically connects shoulders and the neck, and the head. So because of this, I mean, yeah. But in most cases, both of these things, like the neck is basically controlled by these two elements, the shoulders and the head. So next one is the position of the shoulders. Yep, position of the shoulders. And again, it kind of have the same. Yeah, I'll just duplicate this one to save time a bit. So we can control the neck the same way. We could control shoulders by the direction. Again, shoulders could be directed in a different way. Rotation to the viewer, again, they could be like, by direction I usually mean it's a little bit more like psychological stuff when it comes down to the direction. I will talk about direction once we will start to work with portraits. It's just the overall feel. It's kind of the same as the rotation to the viewer, but it's much more psychological way of controlling where it's directed, because these type of shoulders are directed to, like, if I'm going to press them together, they're going to be directed inwards. If I'm going to kind of spread my shoulders, they're going to be directed kind of outwards. So it doesn't necessarily mean where exactly they are directed. It's a psychological direction. When I'm going to talk about rotation to the viewer, this is exactly this. So how they're positioned in terms of the like space. So again, I will get to that. So shoulders also have a control of the tilt, but in addition to the tilt, they also have a additional element which called basically the expression, which is similar to the direction but in a little bit different way. Shoulders could have an expression, because head can't have an expression itself. Like, I mean, no matter how you position the head, you're not going to see the expression from it. The position of the shoulders tell us, like, this is the element of the body language in combination with the head. Expression. Right here we have two choices, either free or tense. This is again kind of a little bit more psychological. Free and tense. Let's just misplace them, or what? Put a tilt in here. Okay, so position to the position of the shoulders. So basically direction, rotation to the viewer, expression, free or tense expression, and tilt. Again, a free expression is some if shoulders are relaxed, and tense expression of the shoulders, there's a different way of like getting shoulders tense. They could be a little bit lifted up, they could be basically, I don't know, pressed together. So there is a way to figure out the tension in the shoulders. There's a super tiny, again, this is subtle body language, remember it, it's completely subtle, it's barely visible. You need to basically look at people a lot in order to start to notice those type of things. But again, subtle body language is something like that we are usually picking up subconsciously, but we don't necessarily, in order to judge a certain situation, we don't necessarily understand it, how to control it consciously. And this is the way, hopefully, for us to kind of establish those things and understand how to control them consciously. Pick up subconsciously and recreate them consciously. Hopefully it's going to work. Again, this is just the theory, although it's applicable to the practice. Again, this is the actual practical way of working with it. So I'm not considering this stream as theoretical stream, although it's kind of theoretical. I don't know. So again, subtle body language, position of the head, direction, rotation to the viewer, tilt, position of the shoulders, direction, rotation to the viewer again, expression added, and the tilt. Again, shoulders could have a different tilt. So continuing. So again, this is kind of it. The same goes for the head, tilt of the head, rotation to the viewer, and overall direction. It's basically where this head is aiming towards. The same goes for the shoulders. So the next thing is basically a face expression. So I guess this is one of the only elements that you could clearly understand. So usually people are working with face expressions to add something unique to the portrait. But ideally, if body language doesn't work within head and shoulders, and you can't tell what person is feeling based on this subtle body language, the face itself is going to look weird. So they have to work in conjunction with each other. So face expression. Yep, face expression. And by face expression, I usually mean one of the most important elements of the face expression is the eye direction. So we're going to consider like the overall face expression, like sad or happy or whatever. But in most cases, we're going to try not to work with the super crazy expressions, with super subtle expressions. And one of the biggest expressions that we're going to work with is basically an eye direction, because direction of the eye in a portrait is the strongest of all. You can basically create a completely stiff face that doesn't have any expression in them, but combine the head, shoulders, and expression, create a proper combination with them, which is the fourth kind of way to do that, and achieve a crazy results. And use only like the actual eye direction. So like for instance this or something like this. I don't know. Of course, it's not going to be that expressive, maybe, but we'll figure out that on the go. Eye direction. Again, we see all three elements have the control of the direction. This direction control is purely psychological. We're going to look at it from not the actual directional step point, whereas the arrow is pointed, but the psychological feeling where direction is heading towards. It's going to be kind of a psychological thing. So, and the last thing is going to be don't want to do that. Is the relationship between those. As easy as that. Yep, there's basically a relationships between head, shoulders, and expression. So far, it's not that complicated. I mean, so the first, again, we covered the portrait control. So this is the way to control portraits, simple portraits. Let's just, again, establish that it's a simple portrait control. Because complex portrait control is going to have an additional element to it, which is going to complicate things a lot. It's going to be one small element, but it's going to be super important, which we're going to talk about once we will start to deal with complex portraits. For now, we're going to work with simple portraits because the simple portraits are. Again, we will start with simplified things. And I guess in most cases, this is more than enough to control the psychology of the portrait. So instead of just studying it aimlessly, as most of the artists are doing, not necessarily aimlessly, they are usually like, they have some reasons why studying portraits. They kind of just like going into this repetition study mode, and they just studying things, and yes, they are learning something along the way, but it's not 100% efficient. 100% efficiency when we have the actual control of the portraits. I mean, when we trying to personalize them somehow, when we trying to not just basically take a photo and retrace it or basically paint over it or whatever, but actually like use the existing portraits to create our personal representation of this portrait, create our own portrait, which is the idea of the control of the portrait. Because again, we're going to study Emily, we're going to study her psychology, we will going to look at her references, we will try to pick up the elements of the psychology in her look, and we will try to implement those elements of psychology into the actual like personalized portraits. So yeah, let's just go into the second stage. So the second topic that we need to cover is going to be, so again, the first one is the portrait control, which is again, for now we're working with simple portraits. The second element is going to be a personal reasons. So the personal reasons are, again, they are going to be purely personal. I already talked about the personal reasons when it comes down to the fundamentals, again, in application to your personal purposes. So depending on what you need to learn, you need to choose a certain topic that you need to cover and you need to study while creating the portrait. So again, instead of just creating portraits aimlessly with no direction, you will start to understand what types of elements you need to cover while working with those portraits. So for instance, for me, one of the main reasons is working with anatomy, and I will implement this reason of anatomy like into working with portraits. So I'm not just going to create portraits aimlessly, I'm going to create them with a reason to study anatomy, and it will change my pipeline. It will change the way that I will approach working with portraits. This is because of this, we're going to start with the skull, we're going to then add muscles on top of the skull, we're actually going to study the anatomy of every character that we're going to work with. So because of this, this is my personal kind of approach to dealing with portraits, and you will find your own personal approach depending on what you need to study. If you need to study space, you will probably not going to focus that much on anatomy, and for you, studying portraits is going to be figuring out the position of the head, like how to control the position of the head in the space. So maybe you will study the dimensions and primitives while working with portraits and trying to simplify the head into the basic primitives and etc. It could be the case. So again, depending on your personal reasons, depending on your personal kind of needs in terms of what you need to study, this part is going to be completely personal. So for me personally, let's just try to establish those personal kind of reasons why I'm going to do that. So what I will try to achieve, like to create efficient portraits creation, is again, by efficient, it's not just pure retracing from the photo, when you're just basically looking and doing the same thing as the photo. You're actually like learning something, you're analyzing, you're working with proportions, you're working with trying to control the portrait through the subtle body language, you'll try to create your personal versions of this portrait, and etc. And one of the things that makes this much more efficient is if you're going to create a portrait, while doing so you will study a lot of stuff. And yeah, that's just kind of it. So let's just cover this now. So in terms of the personal reasons, there's a lot of personal reasons, by the way, and it's pretty hard for me to figure out like the actual big reasons, but let's just take those reasons based on our art fundamentals. So again, one of the main reasons why I'm studying is to basically practice complex human form, which is complex subject. So I know that I need this. I definitely understand that in order to basically progress into much more complex illustration, I definitely need to start with something kind of complex, but at the same time the simplest complexity that's out there. And for me, the simplest complexity is, in terms of the organic, is the human face. I understand the human face pretty well already, and I need to just practice it and practice it and practice it to make it better. And in order to do that, I'm going to dive into the anatomy itself. So anatomy is basically going to be the main reason, I guess, for the portraits. So let's just do exactly that. So yeah, personal reasons. So the second thing is the personal reasons. So in terms of the personal reasons, again, it could be personal reasons, could be personal goals, it doesn't matter. I mean, it's better to look at it probably as a goal, because every artist has some type of a goal to achieve. I mean, I want to learn anatomy, I want to learn like composition, I want to learn storytelling or whatever, I want to learn color, I want to learn values, I want to learn human basically expression or whatever. Depending on what you want to learn, right here you're going to put all your personal goals. So let's just establish them. So my personal goals, again, the first one is study anatomy, of course. And it's going to be kind of one big thing. It's going to be study and practice anatomy, because I'm going to study it and at the same time I'm going to practice it, of course, once I'm going to realize it right away. So it's not just going to be, again, an aimless study when I'm going to just draw from the portrait. No, I'm going to practice it after I'm going to study it. I'm going to try to create my own version of it. I'm going to try to create this portrait with a different kind of, with a different expression, with different camera angle, I don't know, with different rotation of the head. So I'm not just going to take already existing portraits and draw from them. I'm going to take the inspiration from them and I will try to come up with my own personal way of doing it. That way, I'm not just going to study it, I'm going to practice it too. Practice. Practice. So study and practice anatomy. For now, I guess we need to establish what type of anatomy we need to study, because again, simplifying, I guess facial anatomy? Because again, anatomy is pretty complex and you need to start somewhere. And facial anatomy is a good start because it's tameable. I mean, it's pretty hard to tame the body anatomy because of its complexity, but it's kind of possible to tame facial anatomy because you can break it down to the like simple scheme, with like knowing how many muscles you need to establish and that's it, knowing how they work and that's it. With human body it's much more like complex, and because of this, yeah, at some point we will get the same thing with the human bodies, of course, but for now the only part of the human body we're going to study outside of the face is the neck. Neck is definitely going to be, and shoulders, so we're partially going to transition into the anatomy of the body, but we're not going to focus on that much. So again, we're going to kind of sometimes fake some of the elements of the neck and the actual shoulders, not necessarily need to establish like super complex anatomy with them, because most of these parts are going to be covered by the clothes, and it's not a face which is going to be open. But again, in order to create anatomy of the neck, you need to understand how the neck connects to the shoulders, how connection happens from the skull to the shoulders. Because of this, we still kind of will cover the more than facial anatomy, but in most cases it's going to be a facial anatomy in most cases. So the next thing after the facial anatomy is going to be is which again, it includes practicing human faces, it includes working with different racial kind of differences, with understanding what the difference between different races in the facial anatomy, what the differences between different ages, everything included in here. So I'm not going to kind of cover like a lot of stuff to simplify, but everything that involves anatomy and the things that I'm interested in terms of the anatomy, especially one of the elements that I'm interested in the anatomy is, I put it somewhere in here if I will remember it. By the way, in terms of the personal reasons, I believe we need to create two elements. So to make establishing your personal reasons a little bit easier, you need to think from two standpoints. So one is going to be, so yeah, there's going to be two of them. So one is going to be purely psychological advantage. What type of psychological advantage you're going to get from this? Hopefully. Oh snap, I don't remember how. Psychological psychological. Not this. Okay. Wait a sec. Psychological advantage. Hopefully it's the right description of the word. Psychological. Yep. Advantage. Psychological advantage, it's usually you need to seek psychological advantage in experience. So what type of experiences you will going to gain from it? An experience will equal your confidence. So you kind of need to ask yourself questions like in terms of like if you don't know where exactly you need to gain experience, try to ask questions from the confidence point. Confidence. So are you confident in working with anatomy or whatever? If not, then maybe this is something that you need to gain experience in. And the second part that you need to kind of ask yourself with psychological advantage is the knowledge. Like, learn something new. Knowledge. Forgot the D. Knowing that the word is much bigger. Knowledge. Yep, knowledge usually equals control. So the only reason for you to learn something is to learn how to control it. So these are the psychological advantages that you are going to get from this. And of course, every person is going to have their own personal psychological advantage. And I'm going to tell you about my psychological advantage in a bit. So the second one is going to be the technical advantage, which is exactly this. So, which we started to establish. So the technical advantage. Hopefully it's right. So the technical advantage, it's basically something that revolves around practice, which will give you the experience, but again, experience usually gives you confidence. The more knowledge you get, the more control you will basically achieve, and the more you practice, the more in terms of the practice, usually it will help you to produce a more work. So basically right now we are focusing on quantity when we're working with practice. So the reason why you're practicing usually to create faster work and produce more quantity work. And the second one, I guess, as you already figured out, maybe it's quality. So the quantity and quality works with the technical aspects. So this is something that we usually starving to achieve. But not everyone kind of thinks about this element. And because this element, sometimes psychological elements being disregarded by artists, they are starting to deal with artistic blocks and other weird psychological stuff because they are disregarding this psychological element. It's much more like important for me personally as a theoretical person to focus on these two elements, and these two, they will work themselves like automatically, because again, once I have knowledge and once I have confidence, once I have control and confidence, it will help me to dive into the creating work, and sooner, yes, I will achieve quantity and I will achieve quality. This is something that you will get with time. with experience. Quantity. So again, practice quantity and skills. Skills are nothing but just knowing how to make the proper decisions with applying knowledge to the practice. So when you apply knowledge to the practice, you will basically grow in your skills. So focusing on skills is a good idea, but if you don't have those elements of the confidence, control, and quantity, the skills themselves, they are kind of, again, they all have to work together. I tried to separate them throughout the years. It wasn't a good idea. So in the end, I figured out we need to connect them together. So skills, and skills, of course, are going to work with quantity or quality. So by quality, I don't mean super awesome work in terms of the rendering. I mean the quality of the work that works with the whole knowledge that you know. If you have knowledge about storytelling, if you have knowledge about composition, about design, not only the technical aspects like how to render and how to draw and how to paint, no, how to actually control stuff. This is the overall skills. This is your way of knowing how to apply it. This is one of the things that we actually need to work on. So yeah, we'll get to that. So, and quality. So yeah, this is it. So I'm not going to tell you my I'm not going to establish right here a psychological advantage, because for me psychological advantage is purely my personal. I will tell you what it is, but again, since it works with confidence, since it works with control, it's not necessarily something that we need to kind of right here establish. This is something that I'm going to keep in my mind throughout the whole process personally. This is not something that basically will completely change your way of creating things. Again, your personal advantage, psychological advantage is going to be your personal. Technical advantage is something that could be kind of similar within all artists, because we all need to kind of work with skills, we all need to practice, and this is something that's going to be much more universal. But this is something that works on a personal level that's personally for me, I'm not feeling confident, for instance. I don't have confidence in my skills, for instance. And because I don't have confidence in my skills, I need to understand how to connect knowledge with practice in order to achieve better quality. So again, all these things are kind of connected, and I connect them in my own way, depending on where your gaps is, where are your artistic gaps is, you will connect those things differently. If you don't have any problems with confidence with painting, and you will right away start to paint with no problems, then you need to search within quantity or quality or control, knowledge, whatever. So it all depends where your gaps are. But in most cases, again, my psychological advantage is one of the biggest one and one of the main one, which is basically prepares me for working with more complex projects. So this is just a psychological advantage that will give me the experience that I need, that will give me a confidence to attack every work without any hesitation, and it will give me some type of an experience in how to control the knowledge that I possess. So again, as we established before, this is pretty big amount of knowledge to control, and this is just a small part of it. Again, there's much more of it, and it's pretty hard to control everything, and you need to find a way how to do this. And I personally will learn how to control it with working with the simple portraits first. So working with simple portraits will help me to slowly but surely start to apply the whole crazy knowledge that is right here into much more simplified and gradual way. Not like right away go into the complex illustration and find yourself with 100 plus elements to control and make your head explode. Instead of it going into much more simpler thing than where you have control of the head, of the shoulders, of the expression, and understanding the relationships between those. That's it. So you're working with only one kind of a subject. You're not necessarily putting a lot of things together. You're not creating a complex composition. So it's a slow progression to make sure that you will be able to control the smallest elements in order to gain confidence, again, in order to gain confidence and experience, which will help produce much more quantity work. So the simpler work you will start to work with, the more quantity element you will produce. It's not necessarily going to mean quality. In order to achieve quality, you need to understand how to control knowledge. Again, they are connected. But in most cases, this is just my personal kind of a view on that. Like my personal take that for me, experience, I need to gain experience in order to gain confidence. I need to gain control of the knowledge in order to create quantity, so basically produce more work and create better quality work. And there's always a balance between quantity and quality, and for now at the beginning we're going to go pretty slow. So right now I'm not focusing on quantity necessarily, because it's going to like basically come with experience, with practice, and the more I will control the practice elements, the more I will understand like how fast I need to proceed, like create work. For now, since I'm still establishing my speed, my overall, like how many work I could produce throughout the week or throughout 2 weeks, throughout the months, we're going to go super slow. For now, my main thing is to focus on quality. So because of this, we're going to focus technically on study and practice facial anatomy. This is the first thing. Again, there's a lot of things that I need to kind of technically work with. There's a pipeline, there's a creating process, so there's so many things that I'm probably not going to be able to put all of them in here. So because all of them, they're kind of personal. For instance, creative process, it's working with confidence, it's also working with control. It's more psychological than practical, than technical. In terms of the technical, I guess we will establish only 3 in order to simplify. So the first one is study and practice facial anatomy. The second one is the color. Not just color, but color harmony. This is a new concept for me, and we will figure out how to control color. This will completely change the whole pipeline. So the reasons why we're establishing those personal reasons, because the next 3 points are going to work with the pipeline, and pipeline will completely change depending on these first 2 topics. So the more you will spend time on figuring out these, the clearer you will figure out your personal passes, which we're going to talk about throughout the session. Hopefully we'll have time. So yeah, we have 1 more hour. If I will manage to cover it in an hour, it would be awesome. If not, maybe I will extend to another one, but I actually probably not, because I need to wake up super early. And because of this, I'm probably going to finish a little bit early. So, okay, let's just without further ado continue. So again, portrait control. Second one is the personal reasons, which we're working right now. So the color harmony is the first one, and the second one is basically a brushwork. So in color harmony, again, it's super complex topic. We kind of try to cover color a bit in here, and we will get back to the color a little bit later. Again, understanding the instruments that you're working with, understanding how to control these instruments inside of given I don't know, forgot the word, doesn't matter. So again, understanding all of it, like we will definitely work on most cases, like how to create an actual color harmony, how to create relationships between colors, and etc. So this is the thing that we're going to work with in terms of the color harmony. So again, I will, while I'm going to work with simple portraits, it will basically help me to gain a technical advantage, and this technical advantage is going to be study and practice facial anatomy. This is going to be our focus. The second focus is going to be a color harmony, to basically practice color harmony and understand it, not necessarily practice, but actually understand it and learn how to control it. And the third one is going to be a brush work, which is again kind of rendering, but it's not necessarily an actual rendering. It's kind of a stylistic rendering. Let's just leave it a brushwork. I don't want to put rendering in here, although rendering is kind of important. Yep, let's just put rendering. Rendering and emotion, because again, we don't forget that we're not going to use brushwork only to render as an instrument. We're also going to look at brushes as an element of expression, and if we're going to do that, we need to think about expression too. So the rendering and expression, like the basically emotions. So yeah, this is kind of it, I guess. Again, I have so many things to kind of, in terms of the technical advantage, but these are the main things that I need to work on the most, I believe. I mean, studying and practicing facial anatomy will still consist all basics that we need to know. So we're still going to work with the basic primitives, we're still going to work with like the dimensions and etc. So everything is going to be studied while doing this. But again, the big topics that we need to study that will completely influence, it will influence our work and our pipeline is basically studying and practicing facial anatomy. It will completely change the approach. The color harmony will change the approach in the pipeline itself, and the brush work is definitely going to approach that too, change this too. So again, there's multiple things. Again, we're going to work with shapes, while we're going to work with brushes, we're going to work with edges. Everything that works with this, it's included in the brush work. So again, if you don't know what I'm talking about, it's in here. So basically, like the brush work is basically working with shapes, working with values, working with edges, and working with color harmony. It's kind of one big thing. So we probably not even should focus on color harmony separately, but we kind of have to focus on it separately because again, it's completely an unknown topic for now, and because of this I'm kind of separating those because I know that they're connected, but for now we need to separate them to learn how to control them. Then we will put them together. So that's kind of it for the goals and reasons. Again, I already talked about psychological ones. You're going to have your own personal psychological reasons why you're doing something or not. In most cases, psychological reasons are something, again, that allows you to control your personal confidence, something that will give you confidence. Again, for me, I will gain confidence the more controlled my knowledge becomes, the more confident I will basically become. The same kind of goes with skills too. The more skills I will establish in terms of the quality, the more confidence I will grow. So again, it's kind of connected with it, but again, it's much more personal. So because of this, we didn't put them in here, but they are here. So the next thing. So what else? Actually, the other technical advantage that we need to put in here, it's kind of a little bit more personal. Again, this is a little bit more overall, a little bit more personal advantage. It's probably the advantage that gives me a way to, like, intuitive way. It's kind of an overall thing, sums up the rest. Intuitive way to study reference. Hopefully it's right. References. Nope. So intuitive way to study references. This is just personally, and also practice and apply true to life anatomy from anatomy and form scale. It kind of worked with studying and practicing facial anatomy, but I guess, I don't know, let's just put it in here. True to life anatomy, because there's a big difference between true to life anatomy and the anatomy that you will get from the books, and you need to understand how to basically practice your facial anatomy if you're working with facial anatomy, and learn how to apply the simplified version from the books into an actual true to life anatomy, which I believe will only you'll get with experience, which hopefully I will get with experience. So, true to life anatomy. Because every person is going to have a different anatomy, especially when it comes down to the face. And I need to understand the differences between those, because it's not going to be an easy one. So this is kind of it. I mean, again, intuitive way to study references. It's kind of not necessarily a super big, like, mega advantage, but again, as an artist, we need to learn how to study references too. The way to do this, of course, is to find an intuitive way to study references, not just by drawing from them, but actually studying them, like analyzing something that we need to achieve throughout the project. So yeah, again, we established the portrait control, we established the personal reasons and goals. The next thing is basically the hardest one, is to put three things together. It's portrait pipeline, which is going to be created specifically based on those reasons. Our portrait pipeline, creating portraits, is going to consist of facial anatomy. It's going to consist of color harmony, if we'll be able to implement it in a brushwork and intuitive way of studying references. So in order to do that, in order to put all these things inside of our portrait pipeline, so let's just do exactly that. So the third thing is a portrait pipeline. Again, it's going to be personal for each person because of those personal reasons, but in most cases the base is going to stay. Hopefully you will be able to adapt once I will kind of show you my personal portraits pipeline. So we're going to have three pipelines that we need to combine together. So there's going to be portraits pipeline, or portrait pipeline, there's going to be a portrait pipeline. There's going to be a illustration stages, which is going to be some like the overall stages of how to work with the illustration. We're going to implement them into the portrait pipeline, connect them later. And the third one is going to be a passes. We talked about the differences between passes and the differences between stages. Again, the stages, it's something that's almost similar for all artists. Passes, it's something that's unique for each artist. So it's something that basically already implemented inside of the stage, which tells you where exactly you need to stop working on your first stage and go into the second stage, for instance. And right now, it's basically, in my mind, it's a little bit kind of chaotic. All these three pieces together, they are separate, so I kind of separated the portrait pipeline, I separated the illustration pipeline, and I separated the passes for it. And we need to kind of right now establish those and connect them together, hopefully, in order to actually control the portraits throughout the creative process. Because we're not going to be able to control any of those subtle body languages unless we're going to figure out how to work with our pipeline, which will basically establish our step-by-step process, where exactly we're going to solve what problem. So for now, let's just establish a portrait pipeline. So the portrait pipeline, let's just find it, I have it separately. It doesn't have that many stages though, it's relatively simple portrait pipeline. Since portrait pipeline for me, it's a way of studying, this portrait pipeline that I'm going to describe right now is going to be just from like how to look at portraits pipeline if you're just going to study it. So right here, you're probably not going to be able to implement those subtle body language elements. You're just going to probably use this to draw, like to study the photos or the real life, and then basically paint from real life or from photo. It's kind of a little bit more straightforward study approach. In order to learn how to add the subtle body language control to it, we will add the illustration stages, and then we will combine them together when we will work with illustration passes, which will combine the portraits with the illustration stages. And then it's going to be our actual pipeline how to deal with portraits that we'll start to do tomorrow. Because again, I wanted to start to draw portraits already today, but I didn't manage to go basically to cover this information, because again, you need to actually sit and discuss it kind of with yourself and figure out what's next. So I hate rushing things, because then you will start to make weird and stupid decisions. I'm all about efficiency. In order to create efficient portraits, I want to take some time to actually kind of go over those so-called practical theoretical things. They're not necessarily theoretical, they will actually help us in practice, so because of this, go. So again, portrait pipeline. So the portrait pipeline is actually simple. It has 3 stages. So the first stage is basically establishing a proportional base. So portrait pipeline. So again, it has 3 stages. The first stage is basically establishing proportional base. Yep. Establishing proportional base. So the main idea why we need to establish proportional base usually is to make sure similarity. So since we're going to study the actual portrait, we need to focus on similarity, as always. If we're not creating something on our own, of course, but since we're kind of studying, we need to think about similarity first. So the similarity is going to be the first thing. It's also have 3 kind of subcategories, which I don't know if we need to cover or not, because we don't have necessarily a place for it. And time, I'm going to quickly go over those stages, but again, they're going to be super personal. Because they're going to be personal, I'm not going to write them down, but I'm definitely going to discuss them. So the second one is going to be establishing facial features. Again, we're going to go step by step. Again, thinking about efficient portrait creation. So first we're going to establish a proportional base, then we're going to work, and I will explain what it means exactly. Establishing facial features. Features right here, we're going to add to the similarity. We still will continue to work with similarity. This is the way to control it, basically. If you don't know how to work on establishing facial features, you need to know where what question you need to ask yourself. And one of the questions you need to ask yourself, okay, not necessarily question, it's kind of, I don't know, similarity, and you will add to the similarity the expression itself. So this is the stage when we actually going to think about the expression. Let's put the So again, portrait pipeline, it's usually establishing proportional base, which is going to be based on similarity. We're going to aim on similarity. Establishing facial features, we're going to focus on similarity. We'll continue to focus on similarity, and we're going to add expression to it. And the third one is going to be a actual rendering. rendering. And rendering for us, it's going to now, okay, let's just duplicate them. I kind of don't want to. By the way, I need to probably save, because if program is going to now we're adding a third element, and third element, guess what? Believability. Okay. Believability. So let's just quickly talk about them briefly, and I will basically tell you the content of all of those. So again, you will personally create your own insights from this, again, depending on what you're focusing on. Since I'm going to focus more on the illustration or facial anatomy, I'm definitely not going to be able to like apply right here color harmony. I'm probably not going to be able to apply brushwork in here. So two main things that I'm going to implement in here is going to be intuitive way to study reference and study and practice facial anatomy. So I'm going to implement those two technical reasons into my portrait pipeline. So in establishing proportional base, for me personally, while working with similarity, what I'm going to do is I'm basically going to choose a persona, or basically find this persona. I'm going to find a front and side view for this persona. So at this particular instance, we're going to work with Emily. We're going to find basically references with Emily. We're going to try to find a basically front view. We're going to find a side view or something closer to it. And this is going to be kind of a first stage, so kind of a reference search. The second one is going to be reverse engineer the skull for this persona. So for instance, we're going to take the photograph of Emily, both of these, the front face and the side face, and we're going to reverse engineer it and try to create some, like basically a skull inside of her face. So basically we're just going to draw over it. So there's going to be a photo, and we're going to just basically, this is going to be her portrait, for instance, Leah, this is her photo, and we just go into reverse engineer her face and try to create a skull inside of this face. It's a bad example, but still, just, yeah. So this is the way that we're going to basically study the reference in an actual way, and we're going to try to maintain similarity while doing so. This is a hard thing to do, because we don't know how to actually, how actually her skull looks in real life, of course, and because of this, we're going to kind of go on a limb. I don't know, it's going to be a kind of a random stuff, but we'll try to maintain similarity and create her skull from her actual face. So again, reverse engineering thing. And then we're going to draw a determined skull base in needed position when it comes down to trying to start to work on some type of a composition already. Because first we're going to study it, and then we're going to this is, by the way, is going to be a little bit later. Ideally, yeah, we will learn her skull, how her skull supposedly should look like, and then we will put the skull in our personal illustration, like in our personal angle. So for instance, if we had her front side view, we're going to have something in between, and this will help us to combine those pieces together and understand how her skull looks in 3D. Of course, we could basically study and implement the same skull in on top of the actual photo, but I don't believe that it's personally for me works. We'll see what's going to work with this. But again, establishing proportional base, usually it's going to be the first stage. Again, depending on how you're working with this, your proportional base could be something simple. If you're not working with anatomy, and if you're working with your basic skills, you're just going to establish basic primitives and try to simplify those primitives into something that you understand. not necessarily working with anatomy. So your proportional base is going to be your own personal proportional base, not necessarily the anatomical version of it. So the next thing is establishing facial features, which is again kind of a continuation of this. Then we will start to put muscles on top of the skull based on her face. So we will continue to draw over her face already based on the skull. We will make skull less visible in order to not basically distract ourselves, and then we will start to work on the skull. I will, by the way, show you the result, the potential result, how it's going to look on the portrait that I'm working on sculpting wise, for you to understand what I'm talking about. And right here on facial features, we're now going to work with similarity and expression. It's much more harder to kind of work with expression at this level. I guess for the painting it works, for drawing, for sculpting it's not necessarily works, I don't know. This is something that I still need to learn how to implement, but I definitely know that this is the stage when we actually need to start to implement expression. So, and then we're of course going into the rendering, because right now at this point we kind of already have, it basically has 3 stages. So basically we will create an anatomy base between skull and face, so again, which will include muscles of the face, which will include fat and skin and their thickness. Then we will going to draw a mid-detail drawing with kind of not that many details in order to understand the future composition. And then we're going to start to add dynamic to it by trying to add expression. So this is the way, basically, again, 3 stages to go through. Then we will go into the rendering, which again, we will continue to add similarity, we will continue to work on expression, and now we're going to need to add believability. Something that makes this person look exactly like this person looks. So right here we're going to work on high detailed painting. Again, we will again try to work on similarity expression in details by maintaining believability, unless we will decide to, I don't know, go into the stylistic thing. Then we'll work on hair separately, and then we will work on textures. So again, this is kind of the pipeline portrait that I established right away, and it was clear to me right from the beginning. So let me show you the supposed results for how it could go. So again, first you have this is a CM Punk from WWE. This is something that I'm working right now on sculpting portraits on YouTube separately. So we're going to do the same thing for the Emily. So we're going to find her reference from the top, from the front. We're going to find her reference from the side. Then, okay, this is a skull references from the awesome site that I could show you later. Then we will basically establish the skull for the CM Punk, reverse engineering him. Then on top of the skull, we'll try to make the skull look exactly like CM Punk's skull. Then we will add muscles on top of it, like this. So again, right here you can see the skull out there, and then we will basically add muscles on top of it. So this will basically allows us to go from the skull base into the anatomy base, and this is exactly how you could study anatomy, like just purely study anatomy, and then you could go into the rendering and create something like this, and actually understand how now this schematic anatomy works in terms of the form. So how it wraps around, so whatever. But again, since we need to combine this thing with subtle body language, now we're going to the 4th part, which is illustration stages. So stages. So yeah, going into the illustration stages. So again, portrait pipeline, it's more like just a study. It's like, I don't know, just study. Right here, our main goal is to basically study portrait and then utilize this study into the actual pipeline. So here where it comes the actual pipeline. So we're going to take the actual pipeline from the illustration, and we will try to adapt this pipeline to this portrait pipeline. So basically, again, I will cover all three types of pipelines, and then we will try to connect them together. Because this is, for me personally, something that I need to do. I see those pipelines separately, but they're not 100% connected yet. In order for me to control the subtle body language for the portrait and actually tell some story with it, psychological stories, I need to put those pieces together. So let's just do exactly that. And again, one of the reasons why I'm doing this is because there's a lot of artists that are just showing you a creative process in a practical way. There's so many artists that are basically displaying their skills and not necessarily explaining why they're doing this. I want to provide a little bit different experience, and although this experience is not going to be exciting for everyone, because again, it's pretty tedious. We're working with theory, we're talking about weird establishment of the things that we didn't talked about before, but in most cases we still need to think about those elements, because if we're not going to be able to control things. And again, I hope that this thing will help someone to basically achieve much more controlled results. I get that there's super tedious and you probably not necessarily understand why I'm doing it. It's not going to be clear for everyone. But again, as long as there's information out there, there's going to be people who this information will help. It might not be you, it might be someone else that you know, for instance, and you could basically think, oh, this person brain works similar to someone that I know. Maybe I could share with this person, and it might help this person to grow and figure out something that they don't understand. So again, I believe this information will be helpful for those who seek this help, because again, I'm providing something that I need myself, and I needed this type of breakdown before, and I never found it throughout my creative journey. And because of this, I'm creating it and putting it together in order to basically give you something that I didn't have, but I needed so much. And again, I get that it's not going to be applicable for everyone. Most of the people are just going to say, what are you doing, man? Just draw. But again, if you're a practitioner, yes, for you, if you're a practical person, it's better to just start drawing. This theory, it's not necessarily going to 100% help you. You could think about this theory once you will start to practice, but this information in most cases is going to be helpful for pure theoretical people who basically deal with problems theoretically before going into trying things. So before we will go into trying, I want to establish this kind of thing that will help me to control my practice. And again, I'm thinking about efficient portrait creation. I could right away not talk about this, start to paint portrait with no problems, but it's not going to be efficient. I'm going to miss on a lot of points. I'm going to waste time on working with this portrait in most cases. I'm going to lose the opportunity while working with this portrait to efficiently learn. And this is the only reason why I'm doing this. This is the only reason for me to basically put this information out there, to basically explain my point of view in terms of how to efficiently study, not just by drawing from photo with no reason and aimlessly repeating what you're seeing, which is a good idea too, but again, it's better to implement something with a reason. And because of this, we put a portrait control, which will help us to control the storytelling inside of the portrait and create our personalized version of this portrait by adding an idea, and not just study aimlessly, but actually study with purpose to create certain work out of it. We also added the personal reasons for this, so our personal artistic goals, what we need to learn psychologically or technically. Again, this is more technical information. Psychological, you're going to find your own personal reasons. Again, for me, it's confidence, the lack of confidence, artistic confidence that basically doesn't allow me to solve problems with confidence 100%. Like the element of the fact that I have a lot of knowledge, and I kind of know how to control it, but I don't have experience in it. And because of this, I don't have confidence. So again, they all connected. The practice element, which will work with quantity, and skills element, which will work with quality. they all depend on what your personal goals are and where you headed in terms of your artistic journey. But in most cases, again, for me personally, I established that I need to study and practice facial anatomy, actual true-to-life anatomy, not from the books. I need to work on understanding more color harmony, how to create relationships between colors and make them harmonious. How to work with brushes, which is again not looking at brushes as just rendering, but actually learn how to express emotion with the brushes. And of course, this is a good way to intuitively study from references, which basically helps us to learn how to work with references, which artists need to do. And all those reasons I'm going to implement into our 3 basic pipelines, and we'll create a big pipeline from it. So again, portrait pipeline is going to basically work with studying. Again, it's going to help me to cover studying and practicing facial anatomy, true-to-life anatomy, and also it will help me to find an intuitive way to study references. When it comes down to the illustration stages, as I said before, the difference between stages and passes we're going to cover in a bit. But again, stages, it's something that's similar for each artist. No matter what type of artist you are, stages are kind of similar for almost all artists. Every artist starts with an idea, so basically we're going with an idea stage. Just by the way, open the whole pipeline for the illustration that I established throughout the years. So we're going to right now list the actual illustration stages, but since we're not necessarily working with complex illustration, some of them are going to be dropped, such as composition, for instance. It's not necessarily going to be dropped, it's going to be refocused. So again, I'm just going to enlist the regular stages. So again, the first one is just an idea. So you're basically working on idea. We're going to talk about this a little bit more in a bit. So first let's just enlist them. So the second one is composition. These stages are the stages that artists are going through no matter what type of artist you are. So we need to cover those topics in order to create compelling art. Some artists will skip some of the elements, some artists will go into work on those stages a little bit differently in terms of, again, it's going to be passes, not stages, but overall stages will always stay the same. We all need to work on an idea, we all need to work on composition, and we all need to work on lighting then, which is again kind of could be combined in one big topic of composition, but again, in order to separate them, I will separate them. Lighting. Dealing with foreign language here, having troubles with spelling. Lighting. So after lighting, we're going to go with final design, which is ideally my personal name for it, but call it a final sketch. I'm calling it final design sketch because I'm implementing design into every work in order to control storytelling and composition. Yeah, I'm putting the design here, but most of the people just not using this and working with Final Sketch. But again, let's just personalize it a little bit. Sketch. So again, idea, composition, lighting, final design sketch, and of course the last one, which is completely clear, is freaking rendering, which people are thinking the only important thing out there, but it's the less important thing. The most important thing is this. The rest is just realization. If you're not going to work on these 3 stages properly and put everything that you know in here, this thing is going to look fake, unrealistically, unbelievable, whatever. It doesn't matter how awesome how skilled you are in rendering. It doesn't freaking matter in most cases, because again, I'm pretty bad at rendering, but hopefully I'm pretty good at idea, composition, and lighting, and it will help me to utilize these elements better. And this way, yes, I might not create a super flashy artwork, but at least I will try to put depth in work and create it the proper way, which is going to be believable, not necessarily pretty. Again, if you want to create pretty pictures, just dive into this theory. Again, perspective, form, color, blah, blah, blah. we talked about it on a previous stream. You can check about it on YouTube, but still. Again, continuing. Idea, composition, lighting, final design, sketch, and rendering. Rendering. Pew, pew, pew. And that's it. So let's just quickly cover the things that we need to cover inside the idea. So usually idea has a certain amount of passes inside of this idea. And I'm not going to establish those passes. Let's just, by the way, put passes in here. We will call it illustration passes. Probably the wrong way. Yep. Wrong spelling. Passes. So illustration passes. So what is the difference between passes and stages? As I said before, ideas is something that every artist is going through, but the passes is something that's a little bit more unique. So again, let's just put it right there. So stages are basically universal with slight variations. Passes are personal. So because of this, because of the fact that passes are personal, they're not necessarily going to be for every artist the same. So I'm going to kind of enlist my own personal passes, and there's a lot of them. I don't know if we actually need this. Basic information, basic idea sketch, brainstorming. Each of them has at least 3, so there's a lot of things to cover. I don't believe that we have time. I have about 20 minutes to do that, to finish it. We need to decide. So basic, let's just basically talk about them. So idea stage is going to have, for me personally, 3 passes. First pass is basically the basic information, when I'm just basically gathering my personal information. The second one is a simple sentence description, when I gathered all information that I need. Now I'm trying to basically describe what I'm seeing, what I'm feeling, what I want to basically achieve. So creating like what type of expression it is. So again, then I have my basic idea sketch. No, wait a minute. Oh no, this is sub passes. Yeah, I have kind of a lot of things in here. So it's confusing. So again, the pipeline for the idea stage is 3 basic stages. Yeah, by the way, let's just establish them. Why not? I don't know. It's not that big of a deal. The only problem, since there's going to be a 3 of each, we're not going to have place for it, so we need to make things separate. I get that right now the things that I'm talking about might not have sense, but once I will start to put things together, you can get back to this and we'll completely figure out like why I did what I did. Because again, it all depends what type of stage of learning you're in, what type of brain you have. Like, do you have more practical approach or more theoretical approach? For theoretical person, this information could be a gold mine, although like could be. I don't know, it's not necessarily is, but it could be. For practitioner, I don't know, it depends on what type of practical person you are. Okay, we'll create 3. So again, to understand that passes are usually inside of the stages. I already talked about passes, but I didn't necessarily showed you the difference. I explained the difference, but I didn't necessarily show it. I guess it's time to show it. Hopefully it's going to be clear though. So yeah, so basically the illustration passes are personal, and when it comes down to the personal passes, again, you could combine these things together. You could combine these things together. It all depends, like, what are your personal pipeline is. Most of the artists are usually working with the idea, composition, and lighting right away at the same time, and then they're going into the final design, basically to the finalization. So this usually called a development, and this called a actual realization. So right here you're kind of working with the development in most cases, and right here you're creating the final piece already, using all this information that you gathered and putting pieces together. So you could actually separate those in two stages, but again, to keep things a little bit more controlled, we're separating in the idea, which usually you could spend a lot of time on working with an idea, especially if it's a big project. We're separating composition, especially if we're going to work, for instance, with something complex such as graphic novels. With graphic novels, the composition is going to be a completely crazy thing. There's going to be panels, you're going to create pages, you're going to create layouts, and etc. There's going to be a lot of things. With lighting, again, by itself is pretty complex. Because of this, we might combine them together, but I don't believe we need to do though. So yeah, lighting, final design, sketch, rendering. So again, the difference between stages for me personally and between passes is in the fact that stages are a little bit more universal and the passes are a little bit more personal. So let's just start to work on my personal passes. Again, the reason why we're doing this to basically work on efficient portrait creation. I decided to begin with portraits for now because I figured out throughout the years that every time that I'm attacking complex illustrations, complex illustration, I have so many things to cover, so many things to work with, that my brain is basically explodes because there's so many elements of control, like a lot of edges, a lot of shapes, a lot of everything, a lot of interactions, a lot of basically my brain explodes. Because of this, I decided to basically tone it down, rewind it, and start somewhere from the beginning. And for me, the beginning is going to be a portraits. So yeah, we're going to start with simple portraits, which again is going to have only head, neck, and shoulders. We established how these portraits could be controlled with the subtle body language. It's going to be controlled by the position of the head, by the position of the shoulders, by the face expression, and by the relationship between those three. We established our personal reasons why and goals. Why are we doing this? In order to make sure that we're going to study efficiently, not just study, but like for no reason, but actually study with efficiency. Again, you have to understand your psychological advantage, your experience, like what you like. Do you need to gain experience? Do you need to gain confidence? Do you have to gain knowledge? Do you have to gain control? And of course, technical advantage, which is going to be work within practice, quantity, skills, quality, whatever your artistic gaps are. So again, we established my personal things, so I'm going to study and practice facial anatomy, true to life anatomy, which again is a little bit different from what we've seen in books. Color harmony, which is a new topic for me, which is super complex, again deals with creating color relationships, which is pretty hard topic to work with, and this is something that I need to kind of learn how to do. And of course brushwork, which is, again, we're not going to look at brushwork as just rendering thing, we're going to look at brushwork as the way to express emotions, which is again something that is new to me. This was my personal artistic gap that I had throughout the years, and it was definitely lacking. Because of this, we created our 40 personalized brushes. Again, drawing techniques, dry and wet techniques, and textured throughout like last couple of weeks. And of course, one of the things for me is to intuitively study references, which is the idea. Then we kind of established the portrait pipeline, which basically deals with how we need to approach studying in a much more efficient way. So again, we're going to establish proportional base and work on similarity, which for me personally is going to be a skull. So again, we will start with the skull. Then we will, not necessarily with the skull, we're going to draw a basic base for the skull, which is going to be a basic primitives. Then we're going to turn these primitives into the actual skull. Then we will work on establishing facial features, which will continue to work on similarity, but now we're going to try to add an expression to it, which is going to be fun, but hard thing to do because again, I'm still like not necessarily understanding the connection between the actual anatomy scheme and how to turn this anatomy scheme into the actual expression. I know how to control these things, how to make basically your face move. I know how the muscles are working on the face, but it's pretty hard to make them compelling when it comes down to working with an actual person. And again, the first person we're going to work with is Emily from Emily the movie of 2001 up there. And she's a pretty crazy person, appears like a crazy person, and we definitely need to work with the subtle expressions there. And of course rendering, which works with similarity expression, and now we're adding believability, which will help to maintain the overall look. And now we're just establishing basic stages for the illustration, and now we're trying to come up with, not come up, but basically describe illustration passes, which again, passes are something that's personal. For so many years I thought that as an artist I need to figure out my personal stages, but again, you can personalize stages, but you're not necessarily going to be able to do that fully, because again, this is always going to be a developmental stage, and this is going to be a finalization stage, and no matter how you're going to personalize it, you're going to still always going to work on an idea, you're still going to work on composition, you're still going to work on lighting, you're still going to work on final sketch, and you're still going to work on rendering. With passes, it's a little bit more personalized, and because of it, let's just enlist them. So I'm going to try to keep them simple though, because each of those passes have 3 another branches. I'm not going to cover those. We're going to simplify things. So the first one is basic information. So basic information. So in basic information, usually again, you just basically figuring out what's your inspiration, what you inspired to create this work. For me personally, like I'm seeking the inspiration, like the inspiration idea, what basically this what inspired me to start to choose this subject that I'm working with, and usually it's again super personal, but in most cases you're just going to add create a brief description what the actual inspiration. Then we will go into the basic idea sketch right now, okay, when we will try to put this basic information and create some type of a sketch from it. Again, this is super basic, but I believe we need to cover it though, because not that many artists are covering this information, because it's super, I get that it's super boring to go through this information. For people, much fun to see how artists are actually creating stuff, but again, if there's no explanation behind this, I don't necessarily learning stuff, because I wasted so much, not necessarily wasted, I spent so much time on looking how artists are drawing, and I definitely learned something from it, but this something, it's not something that I can control. It's all about techniques, and again, techniques are super specific and they are personalized usually. We need to learn basics, and I'm looking at basics even when it comes down to the process. For me, process is kind of the most important stuff. If you don't understand your process, you don't have control of it. If you don't have control, you can't create a good work. And I still not creating a good work. Hopefully I will with this information, but we'll see. First we need to go step by step. Hopefully I will amaze myself with the results, but I might not. We'll see. Okay, basic sentence description. Okay, working with foreign language, don't forget. Sentience. Sentence description. Description. So yeah, sentence description is just, again, you ask yourself a question: who exactly you are drawing, or what type of character it is, where is the setting, what is the situation, scenario, basically why you're doing it, for the actual reason, what do you want to achieve with it, and etc. So this is kind of like just like internal questions that will help you to find the direction for this portrait. Again, right here we're working with illustration. Again, I'm thinking about this as a complex illustration, not as a regular portrait, but something that we need to do with it is to understand how to apply it to a simple portrait, because again, there's so many complex elements that we could drop because of the simplicity of the portrait. But again, let's just enlist them regardless. Next one is brainstorming. I believe every illustration needs to go from the brainstorming stage. This brainstorming could be visual with the sketches. This description could be this way, descriptive. I usually work with the description. For me, words are looking a little bit better than visuals, and then once I will figure out the actual sentence and I'm going to like properly explain it, like create a decent description, then I will be able to work with the like better sketch. I don't know, it's all about layers. Brainstorming. Right here I have kind of two parts, so it's brainstorming and solid loose sketch. Loose sketch. Again, I get that my approach is kind of crazy. I mean, not everyone is going to go with like to these lengths, but hopefully this is something that, again, as an artist you need to find a way to stand out. Not only stand out in your work, but actually stand out as a person. And usually it's a good idea to utilize your own personal kind of things to the process, and don't hide them. Like, I don't get why we need to hide this kind of element. So if I approach these things that way, they might help someone. Maybe I will put them out there. There is going to be someone that needs this structure. You never know. Free information is always a good information if you know how to use it. And maybe there's going to be someone that will be able to use this information. So yeah, I'm getting super slow. We're actually kind of pretty close to the finishing the session. Hopefully, yeah, I will definitely finish covering those. So again, brainstorming, solid loose sketch. Yeah, this is when it comes down with the idea. So again, this is the pass. This is the final result. The final pass that I need to, that will indicate where exactly I need to go to the next stage. So this is what I talked about, passes. So each stage is going to have a different amount of passes. I mean, right here we have 3 passes. You could go with multiple passes. There's going to be a different sub passes. I don't know, I actually have 3 more in here that basically help me to understand how to work with the basic information much more efficiently, how to work with the good sentence description, and etc. No, wait a minute, seriously? Basic idea sketch, nope. I missed basic idea sketch. Damn it. And part of the basic idea sketch is a sentence description. Yeah. Mixed up. Yeah. Mixing things up a little bit. So basic idea sketch. sketch. So yeah, basic information. When you're basically gathering your information, then you will try to apply this information to the actual visuals. Once you will gather enough, then you will go into the brainstorming when you're trying to work on your basic sketch and basically explore it further, to make things a little bit more, I don't know, interesting. This is the exact way to work with the basic composition. Again, remember, we're working on composition from this stage up to the rendering stage, but again, we still have a separate stage for the composition when we're going to focus on the actual composition. But we're still going to work on composition while working with brainstorming and with the idea sketch and etc. So in the end, you have to end up with the solid loose sketch that is going to be pretty close to what you need, and the rest, and then you are ready to go into the composition stage. Then we have 3 passes in the composition stage. Let's just go through them quickly. So composition stage, I personally separated it in 3 categories. The first one is the perspective psychology. Psychology. I don't believe that is right. We don't have F. Or maybe we do. I'm not sure. Problems with spelling. Yeah, let's just figure out this. So again, the perspective psychology, which in most cases works with just understanding how certain lenses and how certain views are portraying certain emotions. So understanding how camera from the top is going to give you a certain emotion, or how camera from the bottom is going to give you a certain emotion. So basically understand how to interpret, use perspective psychologically to deal, to portray better results. I definitely want to check if I'm right in spelling. Psychology. Nope. Psychology. I forgot H. This is something that I will hopefully learn with time. So yeah, perspective psychology. Perspective psychology. So the next thing after perspective psychology that we're going to have is going to be composition. Just a regular work on composition, like everything that involves work on composition. So usually the composition stage is going to implement a staging, the actual staging. So it's basically a composition of storytelling, understanding how to tell the stories throughout the composition, like working with the basic body language if you're working with multiple characters and etc. So again, we need to simplify this element definitely because we're working with portraits. Then we go with design and solid initial sketch. So right here we had solid loose sketch. Right here we're going to have a solid initial sketch. So it's going to be kind of already almost 100% finished. Not 100, but it's going to be finished almost. So again, design. So this is the time to work on design. If you know how to implement design into your illustration, of course. And the second one is, which is the end result, is the ceiling of this pass is solid initial sketch. So yep, solid initial sketch. So design solid initial sketch. Again, you will understand how exactly your initial sketch is going to look based on your actual skills. I will have my own personal understanding where exactly I need to stop working, or like what exactly I'm considering as the solid initial sketch. The personal kind of things, there are personal checkboxes that I need to check before I will make sure that I will transition into the next stage. But again, this is exactly what passes mean. They mean where you need to stop before transitioning to the next stage. So something that helps you to figure out those transitions. Because at the beginning, I didn't understood at all like what passes are. For me, it was like, what? What are you talking about? This is the same as stages. Nope, they are not. And again, I believe we need to look at them a little bit differently. They're all a big part of one thing, but again, you can't change those things. You will need to work on them regardless, but this is something that you can adapt to your personal process. So this is actually like the way that you are basically gathering information, like how you gather information. What's the best way for you to gather information? What's like how exactly you're working with an idea sketch? Like this is your personal way of working with an idea sketch. How you're working with brainstorming. Do you need brainstorming or not? Or you could right away go into the solid loose sketch. So again, like will you implement a perspective psychology? Do you work on composition or not? Do you implement design to end up with a solid initial sketch? How exactly your solid initial sketch looks, and etc. So the same goes for all other stages. So with lighting, again, we have staging. Again, with composition, in most cases, the composition is basically staging. This is just a regular staging. And right here, we're working on staging lighting. Lighting. And this is the only difference, I guess. Staging lighting, then we're working with materials designs, so we're designing materials. Again, this is my personal passes, remember it. You will create your own personal passes, but again, to just create some type of direction where I'm coming from and what the differences between passes and the stages, I want to kind of just show you what usually my passes going to look like. They might change. They're not 100% still. I mean, they will definitely like change a bit, maybe. They will actually change a lot with new information that I learned so far when it comes down to working with brush work and with color harmony. It will definitely like apply a couple of changes in terms of the like how I'm going through those stages. So for instance, I'm going to work on lighting and color probably right here. So yep, I need to implement lighting in here 100%. So materials design, and I actually have it, although yeah, I have it. So colors, and final thing is going to be either color or values design sketch. It all depends, like do you working with colors first, like right from the beginning, or do you working with values and then applying colors later? I personally for myself decided that in order to achieve a deep color harmony, we need to work on colors as early as possible, start to work on colors. It's going to be awesome if we will start to work on colors right from the idea stage, but again, if we don't have like enough experience with that, then we will probably start to implement colors at the middle stage of the lighting, because now we're working with staging, now we understand how lighting works, now we understand the materials a little bit, and now it's time to finally figure out the final color sketch and work on those color relationships within those two. And it's not necessarily going to be the same as the solid initial sketch, because solid initial sketch might have a decent details in it. This is going to be kind of a loose thing based on emotions in order to create a good color and values. So we're not going to try to do the same result in here. It's going to be kind of a different stage. Again, this is more drawing, this is more painting. Especially this is the way that I'm seeing it. So colors and value designs. Okay. And of course sketch. So again, this is the last pass for this stage, which will finally help me to go to the next one. And then we're going to use both these stages and apply these stages in here. And finally we'll work on the final design sketch, which is again, I could talk about stage and lighting. Stage and lighting, again, you just basically gathering your basic information, what you want to achieve with lighting, like the overall mood, the spatial limitations, etc. So basically, again, we're going to talk about this once we will start to deal with the projects. Right now, don't see the point in talking about this. Again, you will work on the light sources placement, understanding where exactly those light sources are placed, and etc. So this is kind of it. With materials, and of course how strong those light sources are. With materials, again, you will determine all subjects in your scene, figure out the materials for those subjects, and kind of, hopefully, I will create a certain graph with materials, understand like how many materials I'm using for each subject, and then basically break down those materials into categories, simplify them, and start to work on the materials. It will help me to understand what problem I need to attack first, because as we know, like not every materials needs to be painted right away. Certain materials needs to be created later, such as, for instance, reflective materials, because reflective materials are basically don't have necessarily, not everyone have, not every reflective material has the presence of the local color. Usually they are reflect surroundings, and if we don't have surroundings, there's no point of painting the actual reflective material. Because of this, we need to kind of re-establish all those materials to create a, I don't know, step-by-step progression when we need to start, and what's exactly the last material that we need to work on. Again, this is going to be used for the future. Again, these two stages, they're kind of separate. Again, you could work on composition and lighting together, but in the end they both going into the final design. So again, materials, I said, is just basically determining material properties, figuring out how to work with materials throughout this project to control them. And with color and value design sketch, for me personally, it's determining local values and colors, determining extremes for those local values and colors, and then in the end determining the effect of textures and materials, which will be usually enough for me. And but right now I'm actually going to add a color harmony too, like how to deal with the relationships. But again, this is kind of a new info that we still don't know how to control. So and the last two things, just go a little bit quicker because we don't have that much time. Probably don't need this list anymore. We actually need to finish already. I don't want to make this stream like 3 hours. I need to make those streams 2 hours only, because if I'm extending these streams, my regime getting ruined. 2D design and 3D design. So right here again, it is optional. This is my personal approach. First, I will design things in 2D with projections, like you would do if you would work with 3D, and then I will design them in 3D. The next one is basically a final posing. When we're making sure that our pose is working. Again, for the portraits, it's not going to be necessarily 100% applicable, because we're not going to have that many poses. Again, we're going to try to control things within those subtle body languages. Final posing and design implementation. When we're basically going to take all designs that we figured out before and design in here into the actual final sketch. Implementation. Implementations. Yep, design implementations. So when it comes down to the design implementations, again, it's understanding the role of this design inside your work, understand what design is the most important, what design is less important, and based on that, basically working on them. But in most cases, it's just a finalization. It's like a final sketch. So in the end, we need to produce a final design sketch. Design sketch. Oh no, don't have time or place. Probably we need to make this one smaller. It's too big. Final design sketch. So again, I have a final for this stage. Now I know where exactly I need to go into the rendering. And this is, by the way, could be a part of the rendering if you're not dealing with lines. It all depends, like, to what extent you need to create a final design sketch. If line is a part of the rendering, then you will work on a complete line as a part of rendering. If it's not, you're going to get rid of the line. That way you're probably just going to kind of create a pretty decent design sketch. Kind of it. Again, unfortunately today was kind of a strictly theoretical stream. I wanted to make it less theoretical, but again, I can't go into the next stage unless I will deal with those problems. And if I would try to right away show you the actual process of drawing portraits, which is again in the internet so many that you're basically going to be tired of those, I decided to create something different and provide you with some type of a theory that might help you to figure out how to approach your personal process. Again, you could apply this to the illustration. I mean, it doesn't matter what type of project you're working with. Right now, yes, I applied it to the simple portraits, but again, you could work on a complex portraits. You could work on a character design and use the same thing. And again, this method, it basically will work for even for probably graphic novel 2. It's going to be much more complex, but still, it's still going to work. So again, rendering, it's just going to work with 3 categories. First is basically preparation, which right now I don't believe that I need to go through it. Before that I needed that, but right now I'm not sure. Preparación. So basically it's cleaning out the layers, making sure that project is going to be clean, because once we will get into the rendering, we will start to work on different materials, create a lot of kind of layers, and because of this we need to kind of clean up the project, make it ready for the rendering. It all going to work only if we will know how exactly we're going to work with rendering. If you still don't know how to work with rendering, like in your pipeline, you will probably need to work on this first, and then you will figure out how to control it. But again, as an idea, preparations, which is again cleaning up things, planning rendering quality in terms of where I'm going to work on detailization. So basically, prepare how I'm going to render and what exactly I'm going to render the most. So figure out, like, again, get back to the composition of the lighting, understand, like, okay, this area of the picture I'm going to render the most. Right here we're going to go with rendering fall off. And the further we're going to go outside of our main focus, the less rendered this work is going to be. So this is what I mean by preparation. Just basically understanding to what extent you need to render things, because again, we're not going to create like 100% hyper-realistic thing. I don't believe that it's going to be emotional. Okay, so then basic form. Which again, we're going to use information from the stage and lighting, materials, and color and values directly in most cases. We kind of will go from our final sketch to do that. Basic form, and then we're going to work on details. So again, each person is going to have a little bit different variation of the passes. For me, those are the passes right now, for now. I will definitely change them, especially considering the fact that now I added such an element as the color harmony and brushwork. So for instance, right now, again, we kind of covered those two. They already covered in here, like in terms of the study. And then we're going to cover color harmony and brushwork throughout probably those three categories. So yeah, while working on lighting, final design, sketch, and rendering, we will try to cover our color harmony. Come on, seriously? Yeah, we'll try to cover color harmony and brushwork. So we're definitely not going to be able to work on color harmony on composition stage, because again, it works only with arrangement, and it's in most cases in the end it's going to produce a line work, not necessarily something that will work with colors. It will help us to understand how the exact idea is going to look like, and then we will start to work on the color harmony right from here, stage and lighting, materials, and etc. Maybe we'll right away start to work with colors right here, not with values separately, but again, creating the relationships of all of them. Because as artists, we need to learn how to see values with colors, not separately. And again, we're going to talk about this throughout the creative process. Again, this is kind of it almost. Again, it's not necessarily answered all questions. I mean, now I put all these things together, and now I know where to start. I mean, the only problem that I have right now is to how to combine them together now. Because, for instance, when it comes down to the passes, I need to connect the color harmony and how to use color, which basically means from what type of stage we're going to work with color. It's going to be either abstract or controlled. So I guess this is something that I need to spend separately, because if I'm going to do this during the stream, it's going to be me thinking and that's it. So it's something I need to think about. When it comes down to the brush work, again, it's just understanding how to control like soft versus hard. I mean, do we need to start with soft and then in terms of the process and then go into the hard edges? So I mean, for instance, if you're going to paint something, I'll just take some brush and just go with all wet techniques. Just take something with less pigment. So what I mean by this, like the hard start or soft start, it sounds weird, but again, if you will start with soft, then most of your work is going to be drawn like with soft edges. You're not going to have like that many distinct elements in your work when you're going to work on a sketch. So you're going to put some kind of weird like elements, like apply that this could be a character somewhere, like establish something similar to the tree but not necessarily work with the tree. Again, this is kind of a soft approach. We're not establishing all elements of the scene right away. With hard approach, we are right away starting to work. Basically, hard approach works best if you work with using the solid initial sketch, because you already have hard separate characters and hard edges, and then you basically will fill those edges in with the color, and then you will work on like different type of colors. Soft approach is a little bit more sketchy, so when you're using a soft approach, you don't have your solid initial sketch under your painting, and instead you just kind of like painting from the ground up. This is probably, I believe I'm going to use soft approach, because I'm still going to use solid initial sketch as the direction, staging lighting. Yeah, let's just call it a soft approach. Again, once I will start to deal with those, I will completely explain and it's going to be visible. Right now it's just like plain theory, cannot necessarily understand what I'm talking about maybe, but again, soft approach, staging, lighting. We're going to start to deal with soft approach once we will start to deal with lighting, because once lighting is staged, we will already start to implement color. Maybe soft approach is going to be used, I don't know, here with Final Sketch. Yeah, probably in Final Sketch. Yep, it's better going to be if it's going to be applied in Final Sketch once we will start to work with colors. Because I don't believe that right here we're going to actually work with colors. It's right now my main thing is going to be work on staging. Probably not even going to... I still don't know to what extent I need to work with the solid initial sketch. Like, do I need to implement lighting to it or not? Or this is actually going to be the addition of lighting to it? I don't know. Again, we need to go through this in order to figure out how to work with it. You can establish your passes outside of your experience, but unless you will get this experience, you're not necessarily going to be able to control it. Okay, so this is kind of it, I believe. I guess we covered everything that I wanted to cover throughout the session. So the next step for me is going to be to combine all these things together and find a way how to work on, like, how to gather the basic information for the portrait, how to gather, like, how exactly the idea sketch needs to look like for the portrait, how exactly I need to brainstorm portrait, how exactly I need to work on perspective in portrait, do I need to do it or not, like how exactly I'm going to implement the psychology inside of the portrait. So again, the stages will stay, like, throughout the portrait. We're still going to work with idea, composition, lighting, final design, sketch, and rendering, but the passes will definitely change for the portrait. They will kind of transform a bit, they will change. So these are the actual, like, portrait stages, and I definitely need to rethink and figure out how these stages are going, or passes, and I need to figure out how these passes now are going to work for the actual portraits. In most cases, we're going to use the same things, we're just going to solve different problems with them because we have less elements to control. Again, figuring out how exactly solid sketch is going to look like, how exactly initial sketch for the portrait is going to look like, how exactly our color sketch is going to look like using a soft approach, how exactly our final design sketch needs to look like, and how exactly we're going to work with brushes while working with rendering. So how we're going to be able to render things and make things believable with portraits. Again, work on similarity, expression, and believability, but at the same time make things expressive and emotional and add something interesting to the portraits. So this is something to figure out. I'm not 100% sure that I'm going to be able to do this till tomorrow's stream, because again, I'm probably not going to be able to work on it throughout tomorrow. So because of this, tomorrow's stream probably going to be just continuation of this, or maybe, I don't know, I will figure out something. So for now, I'm still not sure, like, if I will be able to finish this till tomorrow. Probably not. But I'm getting closer. Again, as I said at the beginning of the session, at the beginning, usually these thoughts are chaotic. And me doing this is a way to put these chaotic thoughts into some type of a structure and learn how to control them. So now I know, and I'm seeing all things right away before me. I know that in order for us to control the portrait, in order to go through the portrait control, we need to implement control of those things somehow into our idea and composition, and maybe in lighting. No, I don't believe that it's going to be implemented in lighting. So now we need to figure out how to implement our portrait control throughout the idea and composition stage. Because yeah, it's not necessarily going to have complex composition, but some type of composition is going to be, and this composition is going to be controlled by these elements. Again, position of the head, position of the shoulders, face expression, and relationship between those three. Um, when it comes down to the actual portrait pipeline, we still go into study things the same way as we would study them, or like just by working with studying. Yes, we're going to establish facial features, and yes, we will go into the rendering in the end. But now we need to understand how to implement those things, similarity, expression, and believability, throughout these stages. So what exactly stage needs to work on a proportional base? Because it's not necessarily the idea, it's not necessarily gathering information. We're actually gathering information here. Yeah, we're kind of gathering references. Basic idea sketch is kind of, again, we're not necessarily working with the basic idea sketch in here, we're just right away going into the studying the actual character that we're working with. So because of it, we not necessarily have place for figuring out where this idea is going to go. So because of this, I have this like dissonance, and I'm not necessarily sure how to construct them step by step. So for me, I still have problems how to integrate these two things in here into stages and into passes. But this is something that I need to think about, and now at least I know where to start. So this is kind of it. Yep, this was a weird session, so I don't know, like, this session is probably going to be the weirdest one again. It was purely personal. Maybe someone could learn something from it, I don't know, hopefully you will, because again, I spent a lot of years trying to figure out how to control the process. I spent a lot of years trying to figure out, like, what stages I need to go through, what type of passes I need to pass through, and understand where exactly I feel like work is finished. One of the craziest answers that artists usually don't know how to answer, especially the beginners, and I've been there too, and I'm still kind of somewhere there, sometimes feeling like it, that I don't know where to finish. I mean, how you know that your work is finished? And I believe question lies in here. It all lies in the way how you're going to like find your personal reasons and your personal goals. Like what type of goals you're going to uh, aim towards, and based on those things, understanding how to control the things that you are working with, understanding like what you need to get from it study wise, like it will definitely help you to understand to what extent you need to finalize your work, and this answer will come to you automatically as long as you are asking the right questions. Again, hopefully while asking the right questions we will come up with the right answers automatically, because again, although I don't have the actual answers how my first portrait is going to look like, hopefully it's going to look decent because of the fact that we established all those elements. And throughout the process, because I established all those elements, it will help me to struggle less and have more fun doing it. And also it will help me to focus on solving the actual problems with this character instead of focusing on the process and not understanding where to go next and whatever. So again, having those so-called passes and complete establishment. Okay, I need to figure out where exactly the solid loose sketch is going to stop, where exactly solid initial sketch is going to stop, where exactly the color design sketch is going to stop before going into the next stage. To what extent I need to finalize the line before going into the render. Again, it seems repetitive, but there's a lot of artists that's still struggling with those understandings. And hopefully this will provide some type of, I don't know, basic information, like an example, how you could attack this problem. Again, it turns out the theory stream didn't plan it as a theoretical stream. But again, right now we're getting closer to the practice more and more. Because before that, when we covered this theory, while we covered this theory, in most cases, we just covered the basics, like the whole thing that you need to learn throughout all your life. Personally, like, I mean, it would be awesome to learn everything. And it was purely theoretical. It's basically what to study, what to read, what topics to consider while reading, like in terms of importance and etc. But right here, it's a little bit more practical approach. So because of this, it's not necessarily a theoretical stream. It still has theory in it, but it's much more practically applicable. So because now like consider this like we just starting the project, and before starting the project, we need to prepare our instruments before we will start project. So you can't paint without brushes, you can't paint without canvas, you can't paint without you can't write without a pen and paper. So consider this thing that we did throughout the session, all these instruments that now you have, hopefully, and these instruments will potentially could help you to put these pieces together. So it doesn't mean that we're going to start doing this at the beginning of each work, no. But again, the more we will do this, the more we will understand, like, it will become a habit. Like, okay, now every time that we're going to work with portrait, we know what type of elements we need to, like, be able to control. That's it, out of the way. When we don't need to ask ourselves a question how to control portraits and how to add a story to them. This is the way. Personal reasons for each portrait could change, so this thing might change. But again, in most cases, usually you have pretty big artistic gaps. For instance, if you have bad anatomy and you don't understand color harmony, you don't understand brushwork, and you don't know how to work with references, establishing those once, it will help you to create this overall progression throughout all of your portraits until you will get comfortable with it and solve those problems. Then you will start to establish new ones, of course. In terms of this kind of thing, again, this is a little bit more personal. But again, establishing this thing once, then you're just going to work on it to make it better. So you establish it once, now you know your portrait pipeline, now you know your illustration stages, your passes, personal passes, and now you will somehow connect them together, which is something that I hopefully will do tomorrow, and we'll talk about it next stream. Yeah, I guess that's it. Again, hopefully it's not super disappointing. It's kind of disappointing for me because I wanted to right away start to paint portraits, because this is not something that people want to watch and to listen. But again, I believe in information and the power of information, and I believe that this information at some point will help someone who actually hopefully will find it. So the same way as the information that we created for the fundamentals of art, I basically based this idea of working with this for 7 hours just to, not just to myself, to connect these pieces together and put them in a relatively simple structure, but actually create some type of a structure for you, hopefully, if you don't have any structure. And kind of, again, they're not 100% true, so you can apply your own changes to it, especially when it comes down to the further branches. But again, this is all about like this type of thing. So again, and of course the Russian version too. So that's it. So again, we worked on brushes. We worked on color. So while dealing with color harmony, we're going to work with like from here. So this is going to be our basic thing that is going to help us to work with color harmony. This thing is going to help us to work with brushes, and the fact that we created our own brushes, understanding how to control them, how to achieve certain effects, and etc. So this understanding definitely helped me to understand how to work with brushes. The rest is just figuring out how to express emotion with them. What else? Yep, I guess that's it. We kind of tested all brushes, figured out like what they're capable of. I didn't, by the way, explain all brushes. I made a lot of changes in brushes like since then, and I'm going to talk about those changes once we will start to work on actual projects. Right now I don't believe that it's properly it's needed. So yeah, again, this is the thing that we did today. Hopefully it will work. So the next thing again for me is to connect these things together. The stages will stay the same. One thing that I need to connect is probably pipeline of the portraits in implication to illustration passes. Once I will connect those pieces together, they will be fine, and we will start to work on the portraits. because there's nothing going to stop me. I will know that, okay, the first pass is to gather information. The second pass is to sketch the idea. The third pass is to go through the sketch. So now I'm going to have direction, and I'm not going to be afraid of the next stage, which is the problem for the beginners, and I struggled with it throughout the years and still kind of struggling. I don't have enough confidence to go from the idea to the composition stage. Sometimes I don't have confidence to go from the composition to lighting stage because I don't know where my passes are, because I'm just like, I know that I need to go through these, but I don't necessarily know how exactly go through them. And again, it all comes down to understanding your psychological advantages that you're going to gain throughout experience, confidence, knowledge, control, your technical advantages, practice based on quantity, and skills based on quality, and figure out your own personal technical and psychological advantages, and then learn how to apply those advantages into your personal pipelines. I believe this is something that we need to work on, because if we're not, it's going to be kind of random and uncontrolled. But again, it's just me. I'm not forcing it. Hopefully it will help someone. That's it for today. On that note, we're going to finish this session. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being here. Have a nice day or night, and we're going to see you in the next session, which is going to be tomorrow, and hopefully tomorrow I will finish this and I will finally start to work on portrait. But if not, I will figure something out. So, bye. Tony says bye too. Yep, thank you for Ella2. So, yeah, on that note, we finished. Bye.